Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Ella and I'm delighted to be joined by Nikki Carter from Microsoft USA, who will be talking to you today about SharePoint versus Microsoft Teams versus Office 365 groups. What should I use when? Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanST and our hashtag is ESPC20. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. Today marks the last day of Microsoft Teams Week. Catch up on all the amazing blogs, ebooks, webinars, how-to videos, and more at your guide to Microsoft Teams. After today's webinar and throughout, we will have questions flowing in. You can pop in your questions in the question window below. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation or perhaps during it as well. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. So now I'm going to pass you over to our amazing webinar host today, Nikki.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft Groups. This is a topic that tends to boggle the minds of a lot of people, and people would like to know, what should I use when? So just a little bit about me. My name is Nikia Carter. You can find me at Nikia T. Carter, even though my nickname is Nikki. You can also feel free to call me by that name, but if you want to look me up online, it's Nikia T. Carter. I'm the worldwide modern work and tech and security tech strategy lead based out of Redmond, working for Microsoft. You could see some of my street cred on the screen. I started adding my Twitter. I have my Twitter handle at the bottom. I also was starting to add my LinkedIn right before this presentation, so it's cut off right there. But if you go to LinkedIn, just put in Nikia T. Carter, and that's how you'll be able to find me. Let me close this little side window. Okay. And go on to the next slide. So let's go ahead and jump in. If you have questions, ask me. Put them in the chat window. I will be trying to monitor the chat window throughout this presentation. And I also will try to keep this presentation to about 50 minutes, to give about 10 minutes at the end for asking questions and for me to answer any questions that I might have missed. Another thing before we really get started, I want to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. Remember, I'm talking about cloud technologies in this presentation. Cloud technologies are always constantly changing, and Microsoft is always constantly updating the clouds. Just like any other cloud technology, it's a constant shift. So my slides may end up being inconsistent at some point, or if I find while we're going through this presentation any inconsistencies, I will try to fix those before I give the slides up. But there may be inconsistencies between my slides and the cloud. Please excuse if you do see that. Also, please excuse me if you see me fumbling around, because sometimes Microsoft moves a button, and I'm sure you're aware of that if you use Microsoft products. Anyway, now for the moment that we've been waiting for, and that is talking about what is SharePoint, what are Office 365 groups, and what are Teams. And then we'll go into when should we use each and how do we get to each. I have some slides on that, but we won't go through that part. I have some pointers, a few things that you should know, and I have a recommendation that I'll leave off with before we get into the demo portion. If you noticed on the title slide, I had Office 365 groups slashed out, and there was a reason for that we will talk about in this presentation. So first of all, let's go through the what is. What is SharePoint? SharePoint is a technology that's been around for a while. Microsoft has had it out since, I don't know, 2001. I didn't join that arena until like 2010, but SharePoint has been around and been evolving. It's a great place to have collaborative sites where people can share information, work on documents together, publish reports, have dashboards, you name it. Office 365 Groups is a newer technology, newer than SharePoint, based on Exchange technology, namely the distribution list. So it includes an email distribution list, shared files, the group calendar, planner, and OneNote. And by default, anybody can make a group and manage a group unless this is turned off by your admins. But Office 365 groups are no longer going to be an experience um, as we move forward. And I say as we move forward because you can still create them. You can still create them now, although they're starting to be uh, in a way where it's hard for you to be able to get to creating them, to be able to get to see them, but they're still there. You can still create Office 365 groups, but you need to start thinking of them as infrastructure, and that's the way that they're going. They're going to be infrastructure. They're going to be the thing behind Teams when you create Teams. So let's start using Teams instead and teamify all your existing groups. When you create a group, it creates all of these different things. So depending on when you create one of the different things in Office 365, it creates a group. That was the opposite. So when you create a Yammer feed, it creates a group. You create Teams, it creates a group. You create a group, of course, it creates a group. Plan, it creates a group. So all of these things are based on an Office 365 group. Like I said, it becomes the infrastructure, but should be something that you're not using as a primary collaboration source. Microsoft Teams was based on Skype for Business technology initially, and it includes persistent chat, online meeting capability like Skype for Business, shared files, and you can add pieces like Planner and OneNote and other types of widgets. So excluding Office 365 groups, what should I use when? Let's talk about Teams. Teams is good for making quick sites for projects. It used to be that you could only do it for internal teams, but now that's changed. So you can actually add external people and internal people to your team. The conversations and files are kind of like Office 365 groups, except for the conversations are based on the persistent chat. And you have the ability of adding other prefab widgets, connectors, and tabs for SharePoint, Power Apps, Planner, etc., and even third-party apps. SharePoint makes all these types of all types of sites, including those for projects, and it's way more customizable. So you can make project sites, but you can also make intranet, portal, have workflows, dashboards, and much more. Now Teams, you can also now add a dashboard if you're using Power Apps, so you can add that widget. So some of the things that were SharePoint only are making their way into Teams, but SharePoint is still the most customizable out of the two. So how do you get to? Just really quickly, for Teams, you go through the app launcher, go down to the apps, click on Teams, and it opens up Teams in the web app unless you've downloaded the desktop app on your computer. For SharePoint, go through basically the same process, hit SharePoint, but as soon as you click on SharePoint, it takes you to the SharePoint homepage. It used to take you to the SharePoint main site collection that is created when your Office 365 or M365 tenant is set up. But now with SharePoint Online, it takes you to this SharePoint homepage, and then you can navigate from there. So let's get into the few things that you should know. Before that, though, I'm just going to check real quick to see if there are any questions so far. Okay, so far I don't see any questions, so I'm going to continue on. Okay, so a few things you should know. And these are things I learned the hard way, so you may want to take some notes here, or take a note here. When you create an Office 365 group, a SharePoint site collection, not a SharePoint site, but a full site collection is created, and it corresponds to that group. When you create a Microsoft Teams, a corresponding Office 365 group is created, as well as that SharePoint site collection. The Office 365 group that's created by Teams, though, may not show up in the groups section of Outlook, where everything else shows up for groups, which I'll show you in a little bit. But there's a workaround, and the workaround's on the slide. And yes, I know it is a lot of steps to get to the Office 365 group if you really wanted to, the one that's created by Microsoft Teams, when you create your teams. You can see the distribution email list for an Office 365 group, or the distribution list that also is created for Teams. They'll be under the Office 365 Admin Center under the Groups section. But you must be a global administrator of Office 365 or Microsoft 365. You have to be a global administrator in order to get to the Admin Center. If not, you won't be able to get there. When Teams is created, when you create a team, there are channels created. The first channel is a general channel. That one's created by default, and then you could create any other channels that you like to create after that. Each channel creates a folder in the document library of the corresponding SharePoint site collection that was created for that Teams. Do not delete or rename any of those folders. If you do, it could cause some serious repercussions that may be uncorrectable, or you may be unable to correct if you do so. So do not do that. Also, do not delete or rename the main documents library, the one that's called documents, or for those of you that have been in SharePoint for longer, shared documents, that document library. Do not delete it. Do not rename it. You may end up having some serious problems, and those problems may persist even if you try to restore. So be very, very careful with that. When you delete an Office 365 group via the Admin Center in Office 365 or the Exchange Admin Center, the site collection, the SharePoint site collection, is deleted, but it may still be seen in the new Admin Center for SharePoint. Files do flow up and down between the connected teams and the site collection that was created, and the connected Office 365 group that is connected to its site collection, but not necessarily between the group and the team. So if you create a Teams and it creates an Office 365 group and it creates the SharePoint site collection, that SharePoint site collection will definitely have all the documents that are added to Teams and that are added to the group. If you were to add documents through the group, you'd be able to see all of those documents. Where it gets tricky is seeing the documents between Teams and Office 365. The only time you'll see all the documents in all the places is if you make sure that you put those documents inside of the corresponding folders that are created by Teams channels when you create more channels. So the first channel that's created when you create a Teams is called General. If you create any other channels, then their names will be created, their names will be used to create a folder in the corresponding SharePoint site collection. And then you put all your documents in those folders, and they will show up in your Office 365 group, as well as in your Teams and in the site collection. But if you put any of the documents outside of those folders, you go to Office 365 groups and you look, you won't see those documents that are outside of those folders. Okay. Messages in the Office 365 group is connected to a distribution list because remember, groups are based on Exchange. And the Office 365 group also has a message board, but the chat inside of Microsoft Teams is based on Skype for Business technology, and it's a persistent chat board. So there is no, it's not set up exactly the same way, but email alerts can be sent out from Teams as well. Email notifications that you send via Office 365 groups or Teams will not be sent to you, even if you're following that group or team. And it's just the nature of the beast because you're the one that sent it. But even though you don't get that notification, you will have the ability to see it in your sent mail when it was sent via the Office 365 group message board. And that's because Office 365 groups are based on Exchange. Next, sharing files and Teams via the chat goes to the sharees, the person that you're sharing with, OneDrive for Business, shared with me section. People get this confused a lot. When people get documents shared with them and they look in their OneDrive and they're expecting to see it in, I don't know, just their regular files on their OneDrive, then they're kind of confused when they don't see something that was shared with them. They forget they have to go on the left navigation, click on the shared with me section, and that's where you'll see those documents. So the same thing happens here. The sharer, or the person sharing the file can share a document from their OneDrive for Business or for SharePoint. If the file is shared through files in Teams or via Teams channel chat, then the file goes into the main document library or the corresponding site collection that was created for that Teams. Again, remember, don't delete the library from the site collection, and don't mess with those folders. Power Apps can be embedded or connected to Microsoft Teams. Only the mobile or the Canvas app, not the SharePoint customized form, because the SharePoint customized form is specifically for SharePoint. For your SharePoint site collections that are generated when you create either a Teams or group, they are not fully featured like your classic SharePoint site collections. So if you're a SharePoint developer and you get to creating some of these groups and teams, and then later you go and you're like, oh, I want to do these certain things, and you go into the site collections settings, you're going to see that a lot of things are missing. If you really, really need a classic site collection with all of the features, but you also want it to be connected to Teams, again, I'm saying Teams instead of groups here because groups, I'm going to give that recommendation to you multiple times to stop creating groups, even though groups are going to be kind of be created whenever you create a team, but don't rely on groups. So in order to still get the team that you want, but the site collection in SharePoint also that you want with all of the features, you're going to have to start off with creating one of those classic team site collections first, and then you could groupify it, and then you could teamify the group. And those are in the notes right there, so you could see some of the steps. You will only be given the ability to create certain subsites because, again, the site collection that's created when you create a Teams or when you create an Office 365 group doesn't have all the full features that a classic one would have. So the different types of subsets that you are able to create, subsites that you're able to create, will be limited because you're not building off of the classic site collection. So you could just use the workaround if you need subsites, but subsites really is not a best practice anymore. So it's really not something you should be doing. You should look into hubbing. How do you hub, use site collections and then hub them together? For teams, here's a few different points that you should know. 5 external team members can be added per internal member with no additional fee. At this point, I don't think Microsoft is charging any additional fees, but it could at any point. This is in the documentation. You want to be aware that at some point, if you go over 5 external per individual internal member, you may end up incurring an additional fee. So you want to be aware of that. You can enforce multi-factor authentication on external members, and I highly suggest that you do. The documents that you're sharing in Teams is probably just as important as documents that you would share in SharePoint, even with external people, which means you need to make the stuff secure, and you don't want bad actors to get a hold of your information. It's best to multi-factor everybody, okay? External people included. Up to 500,000 teams can be created per tenant and 250 teams per user, except for the global admin who can, go crazy and create as many as they want up to that 500,000 teams. You can have up to 5 org-wide teams, and you can have 200 channels per team. This includes the deleted channels. So sometimes this gets people. You have maybe 10 channels and you try to add another one, not realizing that you've already hit your 200 channel limit because a bunch of channels had been deleted. Then you can't create another channel. So you want to be aware of that as well. When you create a private Teams channel, it creates an entirely new SharePoint site collection. And the reason for that is because it's private. So in order to put the extra permissions that are needed on it in SharePoint, on the SharePoint side, the SharePoint site collection side, you need to have an actual new site collection created so that the permissions are so strict between the two because they're two separate site collections. That helps with making sure that there's no cross collaboration or incorrect cross collaboration going on in this private Teams channel that would only be for certain members out of that Teams. For your members, it's limited to about 5,000 people in commercial. If you're in GCC, then you have 2,500 people. GCC is in the US. It is a government, I forget what it is, government community cloud, I think it's what it's called. So it's for the government. So if you're in the US, you'll possibly know what GCC is. If not, there may be, you may not know about this, but that's what that is. Your Office 365 groups can be used across site collections as permission groups. Again, Office 365 groups are being transitioned to being infrastructure. Start thinking of them as infrastructure. This is one of those ways that it's infrastructure. They come and show up as security and permission groups that you can use in SharePoint, and you could use across M365. But you can't see those groups in SharePoint under people and groups, because they don't belong to SharePoint. They belong in Office 365 or M365. So you'll see them in the Admin Center for M365 or the Admin Center for Exchange. And again, you need to be a global administrator, or to get to the Exchange Admin Center, at least an Exchange admin, so that you can get to those admin centers. And yes, there's an app for that, an app for all of them except for now groups, because Microsoft is making that pivot towards Office 365 groups being a infrastructure only. Okay, so I'm going to check the window again, see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions, but if you have any questions, please make sure you put them in the chat. Again, I am monitoring the chat, and if I don't get to your question before the end, I will get to your question at the end. Okay. So now, my recommendation, and I've been saying it this whole time, my recommendation is the same as Microsoft's recommendation. And I've been saying this recommendation before Microsoft even started making this pivot, because I'd already seen it coming. Stop using Office 365 groups. Convert all of your existing groups to teams now. At some point, that ability to create new groups may be completely taken away. And at some point, you may not be able to convert them that easily to teams. So if I were you, I would convert them right now, as soon as possible, so that you're not struggling last minute when there's deadlines and everybody's trying to get everything that they need to get done. Start converting all of your groups to teams, and get trained up on teams, and get your people trained up on teams. Okay. Now we're going to look at some of this in action. So I'm going to show you like how to get to each of these things, how to get to SharePoint, how to get to Teams, how to get to Office 365 groups, how the files flow between each of them. We'll look at some more things as well. I especially would like to hear if there's anything in particular that you want me to show. So please put that in the IM window, and I will go over that as well. Now, as a bonus, there is a recording that I'd done for SP TechCon back in 2019. Just remember the cloud disclaimer. There's been some things that have changed a little bit since that. So you want to be cognizant of the fact that there may be more inconsistencies, but there are things that I went through in that presentation that I may not go through today. So if you're interested, you can go and look at that recording through my YouTube channel. Okay. So let's get into the demo parts. Let me escape out of here. All right, so now I'm starting off in Office 365 or M365 on the home page. I logged in, I could go to the app launcher, and as you can see, I can get to Teams through the app launcher, and I can get to SharePoint through the app launcher. But there's no Office 365 groups anywhere on this app launcher. If I click on all apps, still no Office 365 groups. I can even try to do a search. Let's just say groups. Nope. So that's the only one that's not accessible, again, for a reason. You can open each in a new tab. So if you want to go to Teams, you can open it in a new tab, or just click on it and it opens in the window that you're in. Same thing for SharePoint, but I already have mine open. So what I'm going to do is just go to the Teams first. For Teams, when you first click on that button under the app launcher, so here's the app launcher, and you click on Teams, at first, most of the time will take you to a page that will ask you, do you want to open it on your desktop, or do you want to open it in the web? And you could say either or. I chose to open it in the web because I already have my Teams already open. My other teams, my real day-to-day teams, is already open. So I just want this in a window so that I can work with it in private window in this Teams environment, but I can also keep my other teams up. So if you're a Microsoft partner, or you're a consultant that's working with multiple customers, who have, and you're working on their teams, then you can open up working on their teams, or you're working with them and need access to their teams. You can open up a bunch of different teams in different web browsers and using in private versus the regular. So that gives you more options of opening up multiple teams all at the same time. You can also add them all into your same team's desktop, and then there's a switch for you to be able to switch back and forth. But anyway, onward to SharePoint. When you click on SharePoint, the first place that you land is this SharePoint homepage. This homepage shows you the frequent sites that you've gone to, so the sites that you've been to the most. These just happen to be my frequent sites because this one was created when I created the Office 365 tenant, and these two I created for the purposes of this demo. You can also see the sites that you're following, the ones that you click the little star up in either this corner, like that, like so I can add this one, test team, to my following list just by clicking the star, remove it like that. I can also go to the actual SharePoint site collection. There's a following button in the upper right-hand corner that I can click, and that will also add it to this following list. My recent list, not to be confused with my frequent list, because this is the site you go to frequently. This is the site, this has the sites that you went to recently. Then you can also add your own links here. So if you needed maybe a link to payroll because you're in finance, or you need a link to the time off system because you're a full-time employee or even a part-time employee and you need to request time off, or any other things that are important to you to do your job, you could put those links here, and then when you click them, they just take you wherever the links go, whatever links you set up. All right. Now, getting to Office 365 groups is not as easy, which I've already said a few times. And that's because they were already made not as easy to get to because of the way that they were created. They were created based on Exchange, which means your groups live in Exchange. Your groups live in Outlook. Outlook is the conduit through which you could see everything served up by the server called Exchange. So when you go to Outlook, you can actually see I created one group here on my own. This group, I actually went and created a new group here. But you could tell in my teams that I also created test team 1, which should have created an Office 365 group. And it did. The problem is it's not an easy thing for you to see without going through a whole bunch of steps. And the steps that you have to go through to see your group is you could go to the Exchange Admin Center and you could see all of your groups and your teams here. You could go to the Office 365 Admin Center and you could see all of your groups and your teams here. Note the ones that are have teams attached to them also have this little teams icon. And then there's one more way to get to your Office 365 group that was created by the teams. Well, this is the way you could see all of the groups created by teams and etc. But if you wanted to get to the actual group that was created by your office, by your teams, so here, so for if I want to see the Office 365 group created when I created this test team, I would need to do this long drawn out thing, which I'm going to show you. I go to one of the channels, I click on open in SharePoint. Once I opened the SharePoint site collection behind the scenes, I could go to conversations which is going to take me back to Outlook, but to that actual Office 365 group that was created by the team that you created. So here is the test team 1. Note again that it's not showing up here on the left navigation like it used to show up like a year ago or so under Outlook. Now those teams created groups don't show up. You have to go through all of that work in order to get to the teams created group. Again, I would not use Office 365 groups going forward, but in case you need to get to your group for some reason, this is how you get to your group. And then you can see the files. So let's talk about the files now. Here's the team as the group that I created, and that the group that was created from that team. Here's the channels that are in that team. So if I go back to my team right here, okay, there's a channel called General and a channel called Test Channel. There's the folder, General and Test Channel. If I go to the SharePoint, whoa, which one was it? No, not that. Oh, here it is. If I go to the Documents library in the SharePoint site collection that was created when the Teams was created, I also could see General and Test Channel. Now you may note something here. In general, or I want you to note something here. In the general files, I could see the files that were created, that I created. One I created via SharePoint, and it shows up because I put it in the general folder on that SharePoint site collection. And this I created in Teams, and it shows up in the general folder as well. So this one I created from the SharePoint site collection, and this one I created from the Teams itself. Same thing for the other folder. Now this one is a document that I created outside of these two folders. There's no way for you to be able to see it in Teams. So if I were to go to this, some people think, oh, I could just go up to here, the top level. This is not really a top level. If I click on it, it's just going to keep me in the general channel, because the general channel is the default channel for this team, for all teams, actually. The only thing I could do is I can get to the menu, but I can't really get to any of the files that might be outside of these two channels. Same thing with the test channel. I have files in here that I could see that were created inside of these, either the channel inside of Teams, or was created inside of the folder inside of the SharePoint site collection. But the document that was created outside can show up only in the SharePoint site collection, and will show up only in the Office 365 group, but you won't be able to see it in Teams. So I should stop saying only for those. You can only see it in Teams, in the Office 365 group that's created for that team, and you can see it in the site collection, but you won't be able to see it in the Teams if it is created outside of these two folders. So that's what I was talking about when I was saying that the different files will be shared amongst all three only if they're added into the folders that are created by the Teams channels when they're created. Okay, I'm just checking to see if there's any questions, anything you guys want me to go over. Just checking in with
I can see some questions here, Nikki, if you'd like
yes,
me to ask.
because I can't see any questions at all.
Perfect. So
Thanks.
one person asked, can I add metadata columns in SharePoint and see them in Teams?
Oh, yes. So that was one of the things that I say we, Microsoft, because I'm not in engineering, had been working on, but I don't think we got there yet. We were able to add the views so far, but the metadata, you know what? Let me just go ahead and try it real quick. And the reason why I'm going to do this is because I haven't done this. I haven't done this check in a while. So let me just go ahead and add a column. And let's see together. Sometimes you got to learn on the fly. Okay, so now we have our new channel. I mean, our new tongue-tied. Our new column that I created in the document library connected to the teams. So let's go and refresh. Oh, wait a minute. Did I? Yes, I did. Okay. Yeah. Let me go ahead and refresh and see. Ah, so they did it. That was done. So yes, you can do that now. I haven't been keeping up with stuff as much in my new role since I don't have to do that for my day-to-day anymore. Okay, what's the next question?
Regarding Office 365 Group and Teams, in Admin Center, is it possible to create Office 365 group with Teams? Does such groups fall into a requirement to convert such Office 365 groups to Teams?
Okay,
Okay.
that was a long one. Say the
Yeah.
first part again.
Re Regarding Office 365 groups and
Mhm,
Teams,
mhm.
in Admin Center, is it possible to create Office 365 groups with Teams? And then full stop. Does such groups fall into the requirement to convert such Office 365 groups to Teams?
So I think what was being asked was if you create, um, can you create teams through the admin center? I'm gonna assume that you mean through the SharePoint admin center. And let me see, I have the SharePoint admin center up. The last time I looked, the only one that you could create was one that was connected to an Office 365 group. But let me see. Let's hit the create button and we can create a team site that is based, or I'm sorry, connected to an M365 group, which was called Office 365 group. So it looks like everything's being named M365. You could create your communication sites, which aren't full. Both of these are not full SharePoint site collection, um, fully featured SharePoint site collections. And then you can also create a new team without the group, which would be your classic, I'm sorry, a new team site, which would be a new team site collection, really, without the group, which would be your classic. This is how you can get to your classic. One of the ways anyway. But it looks like, no, there's no option still to create a Teams from the SharePoint Admin Center. But what you could do is you could create this team site collection that will be that will also generate an Office 365 group or M365 group, and then you can teamify that group. So when you go to Teams, so let's go like this. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta click the, how the heck do I get this thing to, forgot how to make that thing go. Anyway, I don't need to do that. So if you go to Teams, you can teamify any group that you've already created. So I'll click on this join or create link down here, and then I'll go up here and click the create team button. And then I can create a team from scratch, or I can create it from a group or a team. So if I click on that, if I say if I want to create it based on an Office 365 group, notice the Office 365 group connected site collection that I had already created. This will help you to connect it, your teams, or teamify any Office 365 or M365 groups that you have. So you can't create a Teams from the SharePoint site collection, but you can create the bones for it and then teamify it that way. That's your option for right now. Hopefully that answered the question.
And then we had another one that was following up to the metadata question. So this
Mhm.
person asked, is there any support to edit managed metadata, retention, and sensitivity columns too?
Mm. I would say now those that would take me a lot of steps to go through because I don't have any of that set up right now. But off the top of my head and based on my experience, I would say that they would, if you can get them to show up in the SharePoint library, then they can show up. They will show up in Teams.
And they said, can metadata be edited in Teams?
Hmm. Don't know. Let's go and find out. Looks like we can do some filtering and stuff. We can hide. We can move. It looks like that is a no, because normally there's a thing for renaming, and there are no other options. So no, looks like you'd have to go back to the SharePoint site collection, the document library there, and then modify from there.
Okay. So maybe one more. This one looks like a short one. Do you
Okay.
recommend that group creation is disabled at this time?
Yes, I would recommend. So let me explain that a little bit further. Besides just yes, I would recommend that you stop creating the groups, that you turn off group creation for everyone in your organization. Of course, all of your admins, all of your global admins will be able to do whatever they want, um, for the most part, because they're global admins. They can get into everything. But put a policy down that admins won't create any more groups. Don't create any more groups, teamify all of your groups, and take away the options of your users to create the groups. Because sometimes just having the ability, right here, seeing this new group thing right here, knowing what an Office 365 group is, and then having this ability, people may use it. And then you may end up with 50,000 groups before you even know it. So I would turn it off as soon as possible for all of your users that aren't admin, and for your admin, have a policy that says thou shall not create any more Office 365 groups, and then get busy teamifying all of your groups.
We go for one more?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
We got plenty of time.
If I create the Office 365 group in ADD, I can properly work with prefixes, excuse me. How do you organize teams properly when created in Teams directly?
Order them properly by. I'm not exactly sure what that question uh, is really getting at. But I'll try to take a crack at it from what initially made me think. Teams, just like Office 365 groups, just like SharePoint sites and SharePoint site collection, can have the ability to get out of hand, for any and everybody. I can't tell you how many groups I'm a part of right now, and I only really actively work in about 3 of them. Some of them are seasonal, some of them are, just, flash in the pan projects that are happening at a specific moment. But people don't always close down their teams. So I end up having a whole lot of um, teams showing up on my left navigation in Teams. One of the things that I do is I just go to channels that I'm no longer really being active with, or I don't really want to see, and I hide them. I also, sometimes will just leave it not leave it unhidden, but will turn off the notifications, so that I'm not pinged every time somebody does a new post. So I think the notification turn off thing, if the button is still here, is yes. Click on the 3 dots, choose the channel first of all, because you'll have to do it for each of the channels. You can't do it for the whole teams, at least not right now. You click on the channel, you go to the post section of that channel, click on the 3 dots on the right-hand side, go to channel notifications, and then you can turn it off. You could customize, or you can let it post notifications for all posts and replies and mentions and stuff like that. So that's the way that I would manage it. Um, I'm not sure that that answered the question though, um, but that's my swing at the question.
Okay. So what is your opinion, sorry, what in your opinion would be the main criteria for deciding what tools, apps, and solutions to launch in Teams and what to leave in SharePoint, considering that Teams basically is a user interface for SharePoint content?
Ah, the last part of that, let me just address the last part of your comments there. Teams is not an interface for SharePoint in the way that I think that you're thinking about it. It's not, or should I say, it's not just, and I'm doing air quotes, even though you can't see me, I'm actually doing air quotes with my fingers right now. But it's not just that. What it Teams was created for was a way um, for people to be able to collaborate quickly, set up a place to be able to collaborate quickly on a project or projects, or just as a team, where you would be able to share ideas, share files, be able to add in widgets. Like if I click on the plus sign, I can add third-party widgets as well as widgets that come from Microsoft. So it's like different tabs that I can add. Um, and that was the real reason. Now, SharePoint is behind the scenes being the collector of files and the organizer of the files. So it's kind of infrastructure behind Teams, except for it's also its own standalone thing. That was a thing that was around for a long time. The problem with SharePoint, though, the problem that a lot of people had was that um, they wanted to create a place where people could collaborate, but creating a SharePoint site was tricky for them and complicated for them. There was a lot of steps, it seemed for them to go through to get a clean interface where they could collaborate. So I'm just pushing back a little bit on that last comment. But to go back to the previous question, which was, and of course my brain just, what was the
It
previous
was,
question? My apologies.
what in your opinion would be one of the main criteria for deciding what tools, apps, and solutions
Ah,
to launch in
yes.
Teams and what ones to leave in SharePoint?
Okay, so this is what we do at Microsoft, and this is what I used to tell people even before I came to Microsoft. Whenever you need a quick project, site, quick collaboration place stood up really quickly, use Teams. If you're going to have people internal and external, um, ask your people to use Teams. Teams is a quicker setup for non-SharePoint developer, non-SharePoint admin, non-SharePoint power user people to create on their own when they need to set up a place really quickly for everybody to be able to work through. So for SharePoint, SharePoint is still very valid. You can use it as a communication site, intranet, portal. So the place for you to put website-y things, your communications to your whole company, communications to whoever else is actually a part of that site collection, workflow, uh, the lists and libraries that may contain more information than you can put into your, especially for the list. The list is a great example. You can't create a list into Teams, but you can create that list in SharePoint, and then you can have Teams display it, which kind of gives you the impression that Teams is just an interface for SharePoint, which it's not. People are going to have different preferences on where they like to go to get the information that they need. Sometimes it makes more sense to put it in a website-esque fashion as opposed to a quick and dirty or maybe not even so quick and dirty, let's share information, files, etc., to get our work done. This is SharePoint can be more of a general thing, but you also have workflow um, that you could create there that will do things behind the scenes. You can have the lists. So there are more applications that can be done in SharePoint that can be done in Teams. The bottom line is adapting to how your company's culture works and what is needed at that moment. If you're a small company, you don't really need company-wide comms, then don't make actual SharePoint communication sites. Just keep everything in Teams. Just maybe have the all company Teams channel, and that would be good enough for you. If you're a bigger company, then you need to put out more information. Like at Microsoft, we have sites in SharePoint for employee information, for HR information, for um, submitting certain things, but we're also pull things into Teams that we can, like the Power Apps that might have been created to interface with one of the lists in SharePoint so that we can enter, like, I don't know, time off. I'm making this up because we don't really use that for time off, but and as an example. Um, so it's not just an interface. Teams is not just an interface for SharePoint. There's a lot of reasons why you should still consider using SharePoint, but if it doesn't make sense in your culture, if your company isn't big enough, that's not the way you work, don't use SharePoint. You don't have to. SharePoint will still be in the background for you, and you can always go there and do things, but you don't have to.
Okay,
Hopefully
so
that answered that question.
we have about 2 minutes left, and then two questions I think will be a yes or no. So will
Okay.
disabling group creation have side effects for other apps like Planner, etc.?
No, that
Perfect.
that that is just that disabling will just disable your users from being able to create ones on their own. The system will still create Office 365 or M365 will still create the Office 365 group when Teams is created or when a site collection is created that's based on an Office M365 group, an Office 365 group. So it won't turn those things off when Planner or Teams or Yammer creates those groups. It just cuts it off for the user.
Okay, and then our last one is, if I use Flow to create Teams in Power Automate, is it going to create Office 365 group with Teams, SharePoint, and group mailbox? Is this a good or bad approach?
Not a bad approach. I would especially say if you're using it for governance. One thing I would also highly recommend, don't let your SharePoint teams get out of hand. Try to control or govern at least the sites that are or teams that are created. If you have if you're creating like a workflow to create teams and maybe go back and modify or delete teams as time goes on, as things are maybe not being used anymore, that's a good practice. But back to your original question, if it if anything generates a team, even the flow generates a Teams is going to, via the system will create an Office 365 group and will create the SharePoint site collection. It all is just connected, it doesn't matter if the user or the system creates it, is what I'm basically trying to say. I wouldn't say that it's a bad practice. I wouldn't say that it's a good practice. I would say it can be a convenient practice, and I would say that it could be a great practice if you're using it for governance.
Okay, great. Well, I think that wraps us up now, just about on time. Thanks a million for joining us today. That was a great webinar.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for joining me today. Let me just pop up the last bit. I know we don't have any other questions, but I want to just show you this part. When you get the slides, I have references in the back. So lots of different links for you to be able to go to. There's even some things that I did back when I was a partner, so you could see two relevant or related topics that you may be interested in that I created when I was a partner. And again, thank you so much for attending. Really appreciate you all. Have a great day, night, or afternoon.
Thanks again. Some lovely comments in there saying thanks very much to you. So people are very happy. Thanks a million.
All right,
See ya.
cool. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.